Hey y'all, welcome back to another video. I'm often asked what the biggest challenge small farmers like us face, and I wanted to talk about that today. Please make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Trees have put on so much growth this year, and we really love to see this system maturing. Year 3 is a big year after the first couple years of establishment, and I think we're about to hit a serious exponential curve on growth in the next couple years as these trees go from newly planted to establishing and for too long putting on the first fruits of the farm. This giant plum tree, it's easily quadrupled in size in the last year, and fall broilers following along. These guys are super healthy. We're very happy with what we're seeing with this batch. Giving them plenty of room to roam and loving the fall weather just like we are. So I'm often asked, what are the biggest challenges that we face as small farmers? And I get that question a lot from folks who aren't farming. I think it's a genuine curiosity, but I also get it within the ag world where folks are kind of gathering information. I've answered that question on podcasts and interviews and the like. And my answer is a lot different than I think what most people expect, and it's taken some time to come to this conclusion. You see, I take the concept of challenges and very intentionally try to frame it as what opportunities exist, and not really seeing the things that have been hard on the production side necessarily as challenges, but as inherent points of growth and learning curve of starting a farm. It's one of the most challenging endeavors you can embark on in this day and age. But really what it comes down to is, what are the challenges that we have direct control over in our sphere of influence, and then what are the systemic things, the more cultural elements that take more time, rely less certainly on mindset or independent action, that cause farmers to struggle. And that's the area I want to focus on in this video. So I think the number one thing, in my opinion, that poses a challenge to small farmers succeeding both on an individual and a systemic level really comes down to consumer culture, and the fact that so many of us small direct-to-consumer farmers, even those that are doing relatively well and having successful businesses, face this barrier of what comes down to convenience. The reality is less than 1% of all the food consumed in the United States is purchased from these high-integrity, local, small-scale producers who are building soil, building rural communities, and doing work that has true meaning, that blends ecology, business, and culture. Now, for the purposes of this conversation, I just want to acknowledge that there is a large portion of the population that simply can't afford the cost of local food, and that's really its whole own issue: accessibility and cost, and the fact that trash food and this junk that people are forced to consume is subsidized to the degree where many people, that's all that they can afford. So I'm just going to acknowledge that and set that aside, and for the purposes of this video, and talk about the tens of millions of people in this country who can afford local food, but for various factors choose not to. Now, I already said it, but convenience, I think, is the main factor contributing here. We've been bred and conditioned in a culture and lifestyle that really values convenience over almost anything, is my observation, even if it's to the detriment of the greater good or the individual good. And what that looks like, as we're familiar, as anyone who buys food and eats, that the avenues that create convenience do just that, but it creates an imbalance for the small scale producer who can't compete with the convenience factor of Amazon and DoorDash and all these things that are so widely used with multi-billion-dollar business models. And I'll be the first to acknowledge that the farmers market model, the CSA model, while beautiful, they're imperfect in that a lot of people's schedules don't align with these sales streams. They can't make it, or they don't prioritize it. And simply put, going out to eat and going to the grocery store is just lower hanging fruit for most people. And that friction that the inconvenience of local food causes wipes out a huge swath of potential customers that otherwise can afford the food and want to eat healthy, but choose not to because they value convenience over integrity. It's hard to know what the solution there is, but I really think in my travels that the community farm store model is highly effective, and that there's a lot of buy-in from consumers, essentially taking the offerings of a farmer's market or the offerings of an on-farm store and bringing it to a retail location that's closer to population centers, that has its own story to tell, that has the infrastructure and ability to partner with many farms and get really high quality organic local food into a place that people can stop by just on their way home from work or from picking up the kids or whatever it may be. And in the Southeast, not nearly enough of those exist, and I think there's real opportunity for more of those to come up and help address that gap in convenience. But it's more complex than that. I think a bigger issue, and one that really frustrates me, is the fact that there are so many folks in our county, in our region, in our state, in our country, who have the income and the means of supporting local farms and bringing this healthy food into their homes to feed themselves, their families, and simply choose not to. I hear often that, it's so much more expensive, even from folks with higher incomes or middle incomes, and that jogs a question in my head about resource allocation more so than accessibility in those contexts, right? How many folks who make that excuse to not buy local food have an expensive car payment that they really can't afford? How many of those folks are in credit card debt for needless toys and extravagancies that may temporarily improve their lives, but ultimately aren't contributing to anything greater than their own pleasure? How many of those folks who offer that reason shop blindly at Whole Foods and other chain stores without ever actually looking at the price difference between organic produce prices at the shops versus organic produce prices at their local farmers market? There's a narrative piece there that people have bought into, And every single time I even go into the local chain here, Ingles, the grocery store, I look at the organic produce prices, and it shocks me that people aren't aware that almost every item there is as, if not more expensive than what you see locally produced organically at the farmer's market. And I think that's just a knowledge gap and an assumption that people buy into. Now, meats and other goods are a different story because of the way that those industries are subsidized and meat prices are artificially so driven down. So those are kind of two separate conversations. But if we're talking about the whole picture of consumers with enough income to purchase local, who choose convenience, who choose, I want to call it bluntly, willful ignorance over stepping outside of the comfort zone and supporting high integrity local food. Now, I mentioned that 1% figure. Less than 1% of food is bought from small, regenerative, direct-to-consumer farms. And when we look at it from a simple numbers game, which I know doesn't tell the full story, but the amount of additional revenue that farms could do if that number even jumped to 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%. Essentially, what I'm getting at is the impact that consumer choices can have on the landscape that they inhabit, on the viability of the rural communities surrounding towns, on the lifestyle and quality of life of people spending their lives growing food in the highest integrity way possible. The marginal change that it would require to boost those things so much is not a conversation about every single person buying 100% of their food locally. It's not a conversation about subsidizing it for lower income folks. It's not a conversation about giant systemic override to make it more viable. It can come down to a conversation about what would the difference be if 1% of people bought 1% more local than they currently do, or if 10% more people bought 10% more locally than they would otherwise. And when you start looking at those numbers and scaling it across the small farms like Wild East in the United States, it becomes really clear that these small consumer decisions and the barriers that convenience and ignorance create for the consumer are hindering small farm success more, in my mind, than any climatic variable, any production learning curves, any pest issues. You know, those are the types of answers I think people expect to hear. Oh, what's the biggest challenge you face as a farmer? Well, the weather's really unpredictable. Or, oh man, I wish that we had a late frost and the fruit crop this year was bad. Those are the challenges people kind of expect to hear. They never really expect to have the mirror turned back on them and see that, oh, actually the consumer buy-in on a bigger scale really, in my mind, is the biggest challenge and hurdle that us small farmers face. Now, what can we do? The burden falls really on the farmers at this stage in the matter. And to be successful, like Wild East has been, we've been extremely diligent about relationship building, storytelling, just producing really high integrity food that people can taste, and being open source about our information and having people out to the farm. These are all really important things that all small farms ought to be doing to address the issues I'm describing. But it really doesn't address the core issue, which is the concentric circle of people who have already bought into small farming on a consumer side is just too small. And the concentric circle around that of folks who are on the edge, maybe buy local sometimes, maybe go to the market once a week, once a month, that is also too small. And when we're talking about folks with the disposable income to afford it, who choose luxury car payments, expensive mortgages, cruise ship vacations, these things that are niceties and lifestyle choices that people make, streaming services, and all of the extraneous expenditures that are so common here, what I see is people choosing those things over benefiting the ecology, social structure, and local economy of the places that they inhabit. That's the part that really frustrates me, because in my anecdotal experience, I know so many folks who just refuse to take on a little bit extra inconvenience or really ask, what can I do to support my local farmers? They're there, but they're too few. And I think bigger than any issue that farmers face in our context, in this country, that is the biggest one. So again, what can we do? We're all trying our best, I know that, as small farmers. And so many folks have encountered success in their context. And in my mind, the question isn't, is the farm successful or is it not successful? The question is about how much better could the food system be with these small marginal changes by educating consumers. And really, I'm talking about a culture shift from prioritizing oneself and spending money, allocating money on things that, to put it frankly, only serve self-interest, versus allocating money towards things that serve the greater good. And the beautiful thing about small farms is it's not just serving the greater good of the local community and the ecological integrity of the landscape, it is also self-serving. By buying in these foods and mostly or largely eating them, the average person is contributing to their health in a way that's extremely impactful. I'd argue as impactful as any gym membership or, fancy self-cooling bed or whatever things people who are interested in health prioritize. And I just wanted to make a video talking about how honestly exhausted I am of the conversation about local food being too expensive. I live near Asheville, North Carolina, where people are willing to spend $9 on a pint of lager and do that 3, 4, 5 times a week, if not every time they go out. But $9 for a dozen eggs is just too much to handle, right? On the one hand, something like alcohol is glorified to the point where these folks that I'm talking about, don't bat an eye at going out and spending money on something like that, but they're completely unwilling to buy organic pasture-raised chicken at the price that it requires to produce and to pay the farmer well. So I'm not trying to come across like a martyr. I think that what we're doing is the best that we can do in the current circumstances, and I don't ever take these types of challenges as opportunity to paint myself or other small farms as victims, because we are agents. But to a certain degree, we can only control consumer behavior so much on a systemic level. And in my experience, as someone who has always prioritized local food, even before I was growing myself, with a very humble income, I know it's possible to do so, and it just takes reallocation. We've always bought cheap used cars that are reliable and last us a long time. We've always lived beneath our means in terms of vacations and shows and eating out and all of these things, and it was a conscious decision that was values driven. And so that's just to say, from a consumer perspective, there's a huge amount of people that could make that decision and simply don't. So again, not painting myself or any of us as victims here, but with how often I get the question of what is the biggest challenge small farmers face, I think it's important to talk about my experience, and I'm curious what other people's thoughts are on this, both from the grower and the producer side, because it's, again, one of these under talked about issues in the farming scene, right? There's so much literature and marketing and advertisement, for lack of a better word, about how to grow tomatoes and, you know, pasture-raised poultry profits, and these things are important and good, but those are known. Like, we know these things now, how to do them and how to do them well as practitioners. And the fact that the conversation around consumer culture is so absent, around farm life culture and how to set up a beautiful life where you don't feel like you're sacrificing and developing a martyr mentality as a farmer. These are really the important questions in my mind at this point to be addressing if we want small local food to not scrape by on the margins of culture, but to once again become the staples of community, to become the staples and foundations of health in our local towns and cities, and to see farmers as valuable as they are. And those are the conversations that interest me. I'm curious again to hear other folks' thoughts. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my ramblings about this issue. And just a reminder, shop local. It's a choice for many of us, and it's a choice that too few of us make. And I would just argue once again that the impact that choice can have is far-reaching and benefits the whole of the place that you inhabit. Thanks for watching another video, folks. I appreciate the ability to air out my thoughts on YouTube and hear feedback from folks, share the experiences that we're all having, because I have my own experiences and thoughts that are generated from that, but this community is a great place to share those and gain additional perspectives as well. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.